It was Christmas Eve, 1997, when Michael and his 10-year-old son, Ethan, boarded a flight from Chicago, eager to join their relatives in New York for the holiday season. The air was filled with excitement as they settled into their seats, looking forward to the familiar joy of family reunions, laughter, presents, and holiday cheer. For Michael and Ethan, it was just another Christmas trip, the kind they had taken for years. The plane was on schedule, and everything seemed normal, or so it appeared. But that was about to change in the most unimaginable way. The flight was delayed due to weather, and by the time they were airborne, a sense of unease began to take over. Passengers were tense, the flight attendants were on edge, and the usual excitement of the holiday season seemed to fade. Michael and Ethan sat together, trying to pass the time as the plane climbed to cruising altitude. They talked about the Christmas gifts they were excited to give and receive, laughed over jokes, and watched the snow-covered landscape below. But once the plane eventually landed in New York, things took an alarming turn. The plane had safely touched down, and passengers began disembarking, ready to stretch their legs and make their way to their holiday destinations. But when the crew began checking for all passengers, it became clear that Michael and Ethan were missing. The airline staff claimed that they had disembarked with everyone else, but there was no record, no sign, and no one could recall seeing them leave the plane. The absence was inexplicable. The father and son, who had been with everyone else just hours before, had vanished. In a state of disbelief, the family quickly mobilized. Desperate for answers, they launched a massive search for Michael and Ethan, reaching out to the authorities, the airline, and even the public. But no matter how much they searched, no new leads emerged. Investigators scoured the airport and reviewed footage from security cameras, but all attempts led to dead ends. It was as if Michael and Ethan had vanished into thin air. Weeks turned into months, and still, no one knew what had happened. No signs of foul play, no clues to suggest they had been taken, and no indication that they had run away. Theories swirled. Perhaps they were victims of a crime. Maybe they had staged their disappearance, or had something even darker been at work. The case became more chilling with every passing day, haunting not only the family, but the airline and the community who had been left with the mystery of what happened to the two passengers. The search for answers became an obsession, but no one could explain the inexplicable. The case went cold, and for years, the family lived in a painful limbo, unable to move on without knowing the truth. As the years passed, Michael and Ethan's disappearance faded from the news. The mystery became just another unresolved case. But for the family, the unanswered questions never stopped haunting them. It wasn't until years later that the real truth would come to light, something that no one, not even the family, could have ever predicted. The years that followed Michael and Ethan's sudden disappearance were filled with a quiet, relentless pain for Claire, Michael's wife, and their young daughter, Lily. Claire's mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. How could her husband and son simply vanish? She couldn't make sense of it. Every day, she woke up hoping that somehow, someone would discover a clue, or that Michael and Ethan would walk through the door, alive and well. But as the days, weeks, and months passed, the reality sank in. They were gone, and no one knew why. The authorities were thorough in their investigation. They interviewed passengers who were on the same flight, reviewed security footage, and examined flight records. But all their efforts led to dead ends. The airline insisted that Michael and Ethan had disembarked with the other passengers, but no one could provide concrete proof of that. There was no trace of them in the terminal, no sign of them leaving the airport. They seemed to have disappeared completely. The case, once full of hope and urgency, slowly became one of those cold mysteries that police couldn't crack. The families' lives were left in limbo. For Claire, every moment was a reminder of the hole Michael and Ethan's absence had left in her heart. She tried to keep life moving forward, taking care of their daughter Lily, who was too young to fully understand what had happened. Lily had started asking questions, innocently wondering, "Where's Dad?" Claire could barely look her daughter in the eyes. How could she explain to her that her father was gone, and no one knew where he was? It was too painful to admit. Over time, the pain began to settle into Claire's bones. The holidays, once filled with laughter and family memories, became an excruciating reminder of her loss. Claire went through the motions of life, putting on a brave face, but the weight of uncertainty hung over her every day. Theories began to emerge. Some suggested an accident. Others speculated that Michael and Ethan were victims of something larger, perhaps even a conspiracy. but no explanation felt right. Claire didn't know what had happened to her family, and that uncertainty gnawed at her every day. The heartache of not knowing became unbearable. The case became a void that couldn't be filled with any answers. The truth was elusive, as if it was just out of reach, hidden somewhere, waiting to be discovered. And so, Claire lived in a suspended state, holding onto the hope that one day, someone would uncover the truth. But with every passing day, that hope seemed to fade a little more. Still, she held on, unable to let go of the possibility that the mystery of Michael and Ethan's disappearance would one day be solved. Fast forward to 2023, and Claire's life had taken unexpected turns. Though the wounds of losing Michael and Ethan never fully healed, she had found a way to move forward. She had remarried a kind, understanding man, and together they built a new life. Her daughter, Lily, had grown up, but the loss of her father and brother still haunted Claire's heart. Lily had only vague memories of her father and often asked questions that broke Claire's heart, but she tried her best to offer a comforting presence, even as her own pain lingered just beneath the surface. Despite her new family and the passage of time, the mystery of Michael and Ethan's disappearance never left Claire. It was always there, buried deep inside, a puzzle that seemed impossible to solve. One day, while cleaning the attic, Lily discovered something unexpected among old family papers. It was a letter, yellowed with age, and it was addressed to her mother. The letter was from a man named Arthur Lawson, a construction worker who had been working at the airport terminal when Michael and Ethan disappeared. Lily, intrigued by the letter, brought it to Claire, who immediately recognized the name. She had never heard of Arthur, but the letter seemed to hold the potential for answers she had longed for. As Claire read through the letter, her hands trembled. Arthur explained that while working on a renovation project at the airport years after the disappearance, he had noticed something odd behind a wall near the gate where Michael and Ethan's flight had landed. Intrigued, he decided to investigate further. What he found behind the wall shocked him. It was a small hidden room, one that no one knew existed. Inside the room, Arthur discovered two sets of personal belongings, Michael's wallet and Ethan's jacket. Arthur was stunned, but his discovery raised more questions than answers. Why had these items been hidden away in a forgotten part of the airport? And more disturbingly, why had no one mentioned the hidden room? Arthur believed that those involved in the airport's renovation had deliberately covered up his discovery, likely to avoid drawing attention to it. But now, with the letter in hand, Claire's heart raced. Was this the breakthrough they had been waiting for? Could this hidden room hold the key to unraveling the truth of Michael and Ethan's disappearance? For the first time in years, Claire felt the faintest glimmer of hope that, after all this time, she might finally get the answers she so desperately sought. The authorities wasted no time in launching a full-scale investigation once Claire brought the letter to their attention. The discovery of the hidden room behind the wall at the airport was nothing short of astonishing, and it immediately became the focal point of the case. The investigation quickly revealed that the small, forgotten section of the airport terminal where the room had been discovered had never been renovated or opened to the public. It had been sealed off, essentially untouched, for decades. No one even knew the room existed, not until Arthur Lawson's discovery, which suggested a deliberate attempt to keep it hidden. What the authorities found inside the room only deepened the mystery. Michael and Ethan's personal belongings. Michael's wallet and Ethan's jacket were neatly placed in the room, as though they had been left there intentionally. But there were no signs of life, no indication that Michael and Ethan had been there recently, no evidence that they had been alive. After the flight, it was as though they had been placed in the room at some point and simply left there. The police, now more determined than ever to uncover the truth, began tracking down the employees who had worked on the renovation of the terminal. They wanted to know who had been responsible for sealing off the hidden room. One former worker came forward, and his confession sent shockwaves through the investigation. The man, who had been working at the airport at the time, revealed that he had been given orders to clear the hidden room and seal it off without any explanation. No one told him why, or what the room had been used for, but it was clear that the instructions were urgent and secretive. As the worker spoke, he recalled overhearing a conversation shortly after Michael and Ethan's disappearance. The conversation had been about a discreet exit and the need to keep things quiet. His words confirmed Claire's worst fears. Michael and Ethan hadn't just vanished. They had been intentionally hidden. They hadn't been lost or run away. They had been trapped in that secret room, possibly for days after the flight, their presence concealed from the public. But what had happened to them after they were hidden? And why were they kept in the dark for so long? As the investigation unfolded, the chilling realization began to sink in. Michael and Ethan's disappearance was not an accident, and their hiding had been part of a larger, more sinister plot. The police still didn't have all the answers, but the pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, and with each new revelation, the truth seemed just a little closer. But the most haunting question remained unanswered. What happened to Michael and Ethan after they were hidden behind that wall? The investigation into Michael and Ethan's disappearance ultimately uncovered a far darker and more complex conspiracy than anyone could have imagined. As the evidence mounted, the police discovered that someone within the airport had been involved in a nefarious human trafficking operation. Michael and Ethan, unsuspecting and unaware, had unknowingly fallen victim to this operation the moment they arrived at the airport. The authorities learned that the original plan had been to take them to a secluded location where they would be held captive, part of a much larger and illegal scheme that had been operating under the radar. However, the plan was disrupted in an unexpected turn of events. When the renovation crew began working on the airport terminal years later, they stumbled upon the hidden room behind the wall, and their discovery led to the unraveling of the entire conspiracy. Michael and Ethan had been trapped in this secret room for days, held against their will, and hidden away in plain sight. It became clear that their disappearance was not a random event or an accident. It was part of a sinister plot that had ultimately failed. As the investigation progressed, the mastermind behind the trafficking operation was eventually identified and arrested. The operation was exposed for what it truly was, a twisted network that used airports as part of its human trafficking routes. Michael and Ethan, who had simply been two innocent travelers on a Christmas trip, had become collateral damage in this horrific scheme. With the arrest of the ringleader, the case was finally closed, and the truth about their disappearance had come to light. For Claire and Lily, this revelation brought a bittersweet sense of closure. After years of heartache, uncertainty, and unanswered questions, they finally had the truth. The years of living with the pain of not knowing what had happened to Michael and Ethan came to an end. However, the truth also left them with a new kind of sorrow. The realization that Michael and Ethan had been victims of a horrific crime, their lives cut short in such an unimaginable way, weighed heavily on their hearts. Though the answers had come too late, they brought with them a sense of justice and resolution. Michael and Ethan's story, though tragic, was no longer a mystery. The conspiracy that had hidden their fate had been brought to light, and the family could now begin the long and painful process of healing, knowing that the truth had finally been revealed. The scars of their loss would never fully fade, but the knowledge that their loved ones had not simply disappeared without a trace allowed them to move forward, a little less burdened by the uncertainty that had haunted them for so long.